All right. Hi, and welcome to the next webinar in our Plantae webinar series. My name is Jason Padilla, and I'm your technical host for today's webinar. This webinar series is brought to you today by Plantae, the online community for plant scientists powered by the American Society of Plant Biologists. I would like to give a special thank you to all our ASPB members who are attending today. Your ASPB membership dues help support this webinar possible. Next slide. For those of you who have not yet joined ASPB, you can join today and use the code %STEM to receive a 10% discount on registration. ASPB members get early access to this webinar. You can learn more about ASPB and opportunities we provide at aspb.org. Next slide. In addition, please be sure to check out our YouTube channel where you can find many other exciting talks, including this webinar, which is recorded. And so you can certainly rewatch them and try to get as much of information and insight from our speakers today. Next slide.
Well, thank you, ASTV and Jason, for helping us in organizing this webinar. I would also like to thank the invited speakers, the audience and moderators, Angel and Baisiana, for their relentless effort in organizing this webinar. As we know, learning and growth are a continuous part of our life, be it corporate, academic, or day-to-day life. And with learning comes the role of teachers. Today's webinar is about a very inclusive topic, enhancing teaching skills for plant scientists. Although the title says plant scientist, it's useful for wider audience. In the webinar today, we have 4 guest speakers, 2 from industry and 2 from academia. Dr. Devayan Bose and Dr. Rhonda Ham are from industry, and James Piercy and Dr. Andrea Patellini are from the academia. Next slide, please. So this is going to be the outline of webinar today. I will be briefly introducing the speakers. Then moderators will introduce themselves, which will be followed by a 5-minute talks from speakers. And then there will be Q&A session. And during the Q&A sessions, audience are requested to type in their question in the Q&A box, and we will forward it to the speakers. And finally, we will have concluding remarks. Next slide, please. So now coming to the speaker's introduction, our first speaker is going to be Devayan Bose. He's a research scientist at C6 Energy Private Limited. Dr. Bose did his PhD in plant lipids from Academia Sinica, Taiwan. And during his postdoctoral research at West Virginia State University, he also worked on biofuel. And in his current role, he's trying to develop sustainable products using marine microalgae. Next slide, please. Our next speaker is Rhonda Ham, who is a global academic relation leader at Corteva Agri-Sciences. Dr. Ham has a bachelor's degree in agriculture education. Her master's and PhD is in entomology from Cornell University. In her current role, she is working to develop and implement a strategy to promote people and innovation for future agriculture. You can find more about her on her LinkedIn website. Next slide, please. Our speaker, Andrea Patellini, is a lecturer at the University of Edinburgh. He obtained his PhD from the University of Cambridge. In the last few years, he has shifted his role from core research area to more education-related work as he loves teaching. You can find more about his profile by visiting his Twitters. Next slide, please. Our last but not the least speaker is James Piercy. He is a communication and engagement officer at John Innes Center. He is not only supporting and facilitating science communication, but also actively involved in training staffs who are willing to polish their communication skill. James wears so many hats. He is a consultant, public engagement and innovation lead at a hospital. He is also a TED speaker He is known for his laid-back style of delivery and storytelling techniques. You can watch him giving his talk on the YouTube. Next slide, please. Now coming to the moderator's introduction. I am one of the moderators. My name is Chandan Gautam. I did my PhD in plant molecular nutrition from Taiwan. And in my present role as a postdoctoral fellow, I am working on understanding the molecular regulations of plant microbe interaction, especially AM fungi and the nutrient crosstalk, which happens during this event. Apart from that, I am passionate about science communication and also engaging with public in general. I am also ex-Plantae fellow for the year 21 and 22. Now over to my co-moderator, Besiana.
Hi, everyone. I'm Besiana, and I'm a postdoc at the University of Sheffield in the UK, where I'm researching plant-fungal interactions. My expertise is in plant science as well as mycology, and my passions deep down are the interfaces shared by education, science, and art, which explains why I'm here as a Plantae fellow. So you can connect with me on X, formerly Twitter, or check out my company's art website, where you can commission scientific illustrations and fine art to continue spreading the joy of science. Now we'll pass on to Angel, our final moderator.
Thank you very much, Chandan Besiana. So my name is Angel. I am also one of this year's Plantae Fellows. I'm a PhD student, joined a center where I work on the gene expression in chloroplasts, which usually involves just getting lots of plants and making smoothies with them, then throwing electrons. And I'm also very passionate about education, which makes me really happy to be helping today to moderate this session. You can connect with me on Twitter or wherever else you can find me. And now let's go over the question. One sec. Yes, so now we go over to our speakers. So first is Dr. Devayan. Over to you.
Thank you. Okay, so first of all, a big thanks to all the organizers for giving me a chance to present in this prestigious forum. And I'd like to start off by, in a way, retrospecting about what I call as not a conventional career path for myself, which kept oscillating between contemplating a career in the alcobave industry right after my master's in 2010, where I got my first test in pitching a business idea through storytelling, something that I'll be elaborating subsequently, and then followed by transitioning into the industry, which is presently creating disruptive solutions for a sustainable planet. Next slide, please. And accordingly, I've divided this talk into two parts, starting with storytelling impact, where I'll cite the example of mahua, which is a traditional tribal drink from India, and my attempts at making it global, followed by further broadening the impact, both at an organizational and individual level. Next slide, please. Yeah, so as you can see, it all started in 2012 in a place called Birbhum in the eastern part of India, where I was watching the tribal dance of one of India's oldest indigenous tribes, known as the Shautals, and simultaneously sipping their traditionally brewed alcohol, which is called mahua, and it is actually fermented from a tree, from the flowers of a tree, as you can see in the left side. It's called Madhuca longifolia, scientifically. And of course, in a drunken stupor, I just thought that, okay, what if this drink, this amazing drink, we made the signature drink of India? Just like the way you have your bourbon in the US, you have the rum in Jamaica, and so on and so forth. Of course, at that point, I thought it's just a figment of my imagination that's going to pass the very next day following the hangover. But next slide, please. It didn't. And I started researching on ways by which I can actually bring the traditional way, as you can see in the left-hand side of this particular slide, how mahua is fermented and brewed under a proper quality control, which was still non-existent. So that meant really finding a right mentor and a potential partner, which becomes very crucial when someone is starting their career. And I found that person in this Bohemian distiller. As you can see, his name is Desmond Nazareth, who presently heads the Agave Industries India Private Limited. But convincing him with the what, why, and how of this particular project, and that too in a single slide, where I have to sell my story, that was really challenging. And at this point, I would like to stop for a moment, and I'd like to say that if the why of not just any particular story, but your life per se is really strong, your what and how really becomes a lot easier. So in our case, the why was pretty much simple, yet something very outrageous, which is first, make a tribal drink from India the signature drink. And secondly, and more importantly, do it with a social touch, where ultimately it's India's indigenous tribal population who will be finally benefited. And today I'm proud to say that indeed this has been a reality, as Mahua is commercialized as this particular brand, as you can see, DJ Mahua in India, and we are just counting days when we are going to take this product global. But then I started thinking that how I can further broaden the impact in terms of creating, as in the words of Steve Jobs, a positive dent in this world. And accordingly, I joined the PhD program. Off to the next slide, please. And I still remember in one of our introductory course lectures, I got to hear this particular person who had a lasting impact in my life, Dr. Yuki Nakamura, who eventually went on to become my thesis advisor. And presently, he's a group leader in the Riken Center for Sustainable Resource Sciences in Yokohama, Japan. And in that particular lecture, he introduced us to this, what I call as the magic bullets or the triacyl glycerols. As many of you know, they are the basic building blocks of the biofuels. And ever since, my interest with biofuels and renewable energies started, which led me to complete my PhD with triacyl glycerols, and then moving on to my postdoc. I worked again with biofuels, the translational aspect of it, and finally came back to, off to the next slide, please, where I belong, that is India, joining a pool of really amazing and talented researchers as a part of C6 Energy Private Limited, which is presently harnessing the power of red marine macroalgae to develop this range of renewable products, as you can see, starting with the biostimulants, then immunity boosters, biopolymers, and of course, biofuels, all coming from the red macroalgae. And this is where I want to say that at the organization, with whatever work that I'm doing, I think I'm making a positive dent in this world. And this can hold true for any person at their own organizational level. And of course, at an individual level, next slide, please. I'm trying to disseminate the knowledge which I've gained over a 13+ years experience in the STEM by reaching out to not so fortunate ones in terms of orphaned, abused children, and trying to make them embark on a career in science and technology. And that brings me to my last slide, where I'd like to end by quoting Dr. APJ Abdul Kalam, the scientist and former president of India, who said that goodbyes should be short, really short, thereby meaning that as long as we are living, let's try to make an impact. Thank you very much.
Thank you for such an inspiring talk, Dr. Devayan. Looking forward to trying the Mahua. And now over to Dr. Rhonda.
Hi, everyone. So I like to talk about careers, not in terms of a career path, because I don't believe there is such thing as a career path. It's really a career adventure in my mind, because you make decisions throughout your career. And so for me, I'm going to talk a little bit about specifically the topic of this panel in really discussing both formal and informal education, because I've been involved in a lot of both. So across kind of the timeline there, those are the different jobs and or places and degrees that I've had. Those are actually going to take kind of a backstage in this talk to me. Sometimes they are center stage when I'm talking about career paths, but today they're going to kind of take a second seat. But I do want you to see that didn't always have these opportunities in this formal and informal education space as part of my job, but it was something that was always a passion for me and something that I felt like I had to do regardless of what my career was doing at that time. And so I found opportunities and ways to get involved. And I would encourage you, if you're on this seminar, you clearly have an interest in this area. So if you don't feel like it's a part of your role or part of your job, doesn't have to be. You can create those opportunities for yourself. And so in high school, I'll go all the way back to high school. I got involved in agriculture and was part of FFA, which was the National Organization for Youth. Really thought I wanted to be a veterinarian because I loved animals. Animals were the thing that drew me into the field in the first place. But then it wasn't until an experience I had between my junior and my senior year that introduced me to a whole other area of science and really changed my life. So I think if we all stop and just take a moment to think back to, why are you where you are today? Most of us can come up with an instance, an experience that they had, or a person that was super influential in getting you there. And that is why education and outreach is so important. It's because those connections, we never know when they will take place or who will be that inspiration for us, but you can be that inspiration for someone else because somebody gave you that opportunity. For me, I got an internship in high school to be in an entomology lab. I was terrified of insects, like beyond terrified. I did not like being in a room where there was a quote unquote creepy crawly. So for me, that was a big leap of faith to say, okay, I'm going to do this. I'm going to try this experience. I went into it thinking I'm going to hate it. It's an 8-week thing I just need to get through. And honestly, my motivations were, it was a paid internship and I was trying to save money for college. So that was my motivation, just get paid, go home. But in being in there, experiencing it, and again, having mentors that saw me beyond a high school student. They saw me as someone that was a scientist. They treated me as such. They said, this is your project. I think especially in formal and informal learning, a lot of the vocabulary and the words we use to inspire matter, right? So when you're working with students, it's not just telling them about what you do, it's engaging them. And so I really like thinking about, how do I engage people in whatever experience we have, right? However we have it set up. So that was where it started for me, as somebody gave me that opportunity, and that clicked in my mind that, hey, I could be a scientist too. It had never occurred to me really that I could be a scientist in really anything. And that was when it really solidified for me. So I moved on to Fresno State, which is where I have my undergraduate degree in agricultural education. So that's the formal aspect of my education background. I taught at the high school level for a year before I went to graduate school. In graduate school, I did formal teaching as a teaching assistant, as a TA. So was again involved in more of that formal education aspect, and really thought I'd be an academic, honestly. But life has other plans for us. We never know where we'll end up. So I ended up in industry. I love it. I've been there for 15 years now in a variety of these other roles that you see on this slide. But the thing that's been constant for me is that I found opportunities to engage. So these pictures of me working with youth, doing some virtual education, those have all really stemmed from me finding ways to incorporate that into my role. And at Corteva Agriscience, what I've done is I knew that I could only reach so many as one individual person. But if I can empower others to also have that passion, like hopefully I'm doing today on this call, hopefully I'll impassion some of you to say, hey, I can do this. I'm going to go and volunteer in my local elementary school classroom, or go back to the school you graduated from and talk about who you are and why you're where you are. If I can empower others to do that, I have a much bigger reach than I can myself doing this alone. So really, that is where the informal education comes in, is I've created in an industry setting a group of, with others, of course, I didn't do it alone, a group called our Corteva Grows Science Outreach Program, where we empower our employees to go out in the communities and engage in STEM learning events, science festivals, after school science nights, in classroom studies. So kind of a wide variety. So that is kind of where I'm at now. And fortunately for me, I've been able to, over a 15-year career in industry, the first 10 of that working in other things and having to do it as my quote unquote volunteer time, to now doing that full time. So my role now I describe as K through Gray education and outreach. So really reaching all ages. So thank you again for having me. I can't wait to answer some of your questions. And if there's anything that you'd like to connect with me after this, I'm happy to connect with people as well on either LinkedIn or my Twitter and Instagram handles are at InsectDoc.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rhonda. That was a very inspiring talk. And now we go over to Dr. Andrea. Just let me switch the slides.
Hi, everyone, and thank you very much for inviting me. While Angelo switches the slides, I very briefly, in my presentation, want to touch upon ways we can develop our skills as educators and what goals we might want to have in our teaching. This really reflects my own journey, so I will kind of take it from an academic angle because that's my background, but hopefully many of the points I will make will also apply to other contexts. Could I please have the next slide? So very often the starting point on an educational journey is when we hit the ground running and you take up some form of teaching opportunity. I would strongly encourage you to do so, whether it's a guest lecture or demonstrating in some activities. The important thing, I think, is not to be too hard on ourselves. We're unlikely to be the best educator we can be from day one. It takes time and practice to hone on your skills. And a key component of that training journey is engaging with a pedagogical literature, which is rich and vast. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. There is good advice out there. The challenging thing is perhaps finding the time to explore that literature. Obviously, we're all busy reading the plant science one, so how can we find extra time for that? That's why accredited programs run by most universities, at least in the UK, can support that endeavor by providing structure and timeframes. The important thing to know is that these programs tend to be free for staff, and in most cases at the end, you can get an accreditation from Advanced HE, in the case of in the UK. And these accreditation are well known, they're important for lectureship, and they're well recognized in the UK, but they're also portable abroad. So it's really worth the investment. And that's kind of the journey I went through to reach the position I'm in at the moment. Could I please have the next slide? Yeah, thank you. My next question is about the kind of educators we want to be. And I appreciate that that's a rather personal question, but we can start maybe by focusing on the things that the students are looking out for in a teacher. And based on the kind of literature, Brookfield stressed two elements: authenticity on one side and credibility on the other. And one of the most important aspects of authenticity is your personness. We're not robots, hopefully. If it was just about regurgitating knowledge, and artificial intelligence, which is a trending topic, could merely replace us. We need to believe that there's a value in the human educator. And that value, at least for me, is personness. Your ability to display allyship, role model with your behaviors, or disclose your own history if you're comfortable with that, of course. Those are things that can make students feel like they belong in a particular educational setting. Credibility, on the other hand, certainly stems from your own expertise, your role as an active or a past scientist. But perhaps more so, it is rooted in your conviction. And by that, I mean the ability to convey to the students that the knowledge you're imparting matters for them and for society. Could I please have the next slide? Lastly, what kind of things should we be teaching? Now, there's obviously a syllabus for most courses. I'm talking about kind of undergraduate and graduate courses, but I'm a strong believer in a socially critical curriculum. And for those of you not familiar with the term, it is a recognition that knowledge doesn't develop in a vacuum. It is influenced by and itself affects society. We should not hide behind ideas of neutrality of science. We need to talk about the problematic past and present, the kind of skeletons in the closet of science, so the future societies don't repeat those mistakes. Students will be key members of future society, and we should best prepare them for their responsibility. The use and misuse of science can have massive impacts on society. For example, when we teach genetics in simplified ways, we might foster ideas of genetic determinism, and that can escalate in racist or eugenic ideologies. For that reason, we need to openly discuss these problems, embracing the past, the present, and the future of our teaching. It is an opportunity to support positive change. And this is really all I should say in these 5 minutes, or I could go on for hours, but hopefully it is a nice bedrock for further discussion in the Q&A. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Dr. Andrea. That was a very thought-provoking talk. And now for final speaker, my colleague James.
Thank you. Hello,
Over to
everybody.
you.
It's great to be here to have a bit of a chat. So my name is James Piercy. I am a Communications and Engagement Officer. What does that mean? Well, it means I do two things, really. It means that I help scientists communicate their work to non-scientists, but also I encourage them to engage with audiences, to have a dialogue, to actually listen to what people are saying and their attitudes and their aspirations and what they think about the science. So as one of our previous speakers just said, it's not enough just to go out and talk at people. We need to have conversations. And my role is to kind of facilitate those conversations and discussions, really. And in some areas of science, there may be some controversy. There may be some contention over the views. There's a really nice expression. I don't know where it came from, but I'm going to steal it and pretend I made it up. Nobody ever changed their mind because of facts. And I think that's true, right? If we want to talk to people about GM technologies and they're against it and they think it's weird Frankenstein food, just shouting at them isn't going to make any difference. If people don't believe in climate change, just telling them that they're wrong isn't going to help. It isn't going to change anything, right? So we need to make some more emotional connections with people and find different ways to do that. And I guess that's what I'm about. I should probably confess, I'm not a biologist. Sorry. If anything, I'm a chemist. I did chemistry for my first degree, but that was ages ago when there weren't as many elements. It was probably a bit easier then. For about 28 years, I've been a science communicator. So I get paid to talk to people about science and engineering and maths, and increasingly these days to teach other people to do that. And I started off by doing, blowing stuff up and saying, cool, look at that, isn't that fun? And that's good. We like that. And we like to walk on top of corn flour, and we like to electrocute gherkins because that's exciting stuff. But it occurred to me a way through my career that actually I didn't need the excitement of the bursting balloons and the bangs and the hydrogen explosions, because what people are really interested in is just other people. So just talking to people and sharing stories with other people. And that's predominantly what I do now. So I tell stories. I tell stories about people, about science, and I encourage other scientists and researchers to do that too, and to make that human connection. We're all apes, right? We all like to kind of talk to each other. And I've had the privilege over the years of doing that all over the place. So I've traveled right around the world, really, just kind of talking to people. And what I've found out is that we're pretty much the same. The kids that I spoke to in Abu Dhabi at the Science Festival there were really just the same as the kids I spoke to in New Zealand and the kids I spoke to in Scotland. Right? We're the same kind of thing. And that's good. That makes our life a bit easy, right? Because that means that people are interested in stuff that we're interested in, and they're interested in us. And the biggest thing, the biggest secret I can give to anybody who really wants to do some science communication is talk about you, because you are more interesting than your science. I want to know why you care. And if I understand why you care about it, then I'm going to care about it too. And I think that's really the secret to this thing. And we've heard a bit about sort of formal education. I suppose I've always worked in informal science education. And I think the really key to that is, as I say, is to make emotional connections with other people, with other human beings, to share stuff that we're kind of interested and excited in. And I'm really interested in listening to your questions and finding out how we can give some more advice. So I'm going to shut up now. Thanks very much.
Thank you, James, for your talk. And thank you to all the speakers for their insights onto their lives and careers. Now we're going to move on to the Q&A section of this webinar. And we have a question directed at all four of you to start us off. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you acquired the skills that you use to communicate science? So was there a specific training you did or a couple of role models that you follow?
Can I jump in first? I started so long ago, there wasn't anybody else doing it. Well, it felt like that. So I learned by doing it and making a lot of mistakes, doing stupid things, saying stupid things, burning myself, setting fire to stuff, and learning through doing stuff. I've met lots of really fascinating people who do it really well. And I just wanted to take the excuse to flag up this book. It's called Hook Your Audience, and it is by Dr. Paul McCrory. Read this book. If you are interested in making emotional connections with audiences, and in that book, he particularly focuses on working with young people, it's in there. The guy's incredible. He's a very, very shy, modest, unassuming man, and on stage, wow. And he knows how to grab audiences. Yes, definitely a role model.
So I'll jump in. So I've had both formal training as a educator, so that helped a lot. I also minored in communications, which I think was accidentally brilliant. It wasn't intentional. I didn't know I was going to do this kind of work. And so I had a lot of different types of communication, right? So depending on the audience, depending on what you're trying to convey, there's different strategies. And so there's actually some classes that teach you some techniques in persuasion, right? For example, or engaging, just public speaking, right? So I know some of my colleagues have been involved with organizations like Toastmasters, right? To get just that practice. Because I think the more you practice, the better. And James, I'm with you. I made a lot of mistakes because there weren't a lot of people doing this when I was in school. So again, I'm kind of older than the current audience probably is, but there weren't a lot of people doing this. And at the time when I was doing it, it was actually looked at as a negative. Like, why are you wasting your time outside of the lab and doing real research, quote unquote, real research to do this other thing. So I had to overcome some of those stereotypes of seeing myself as a scientist still in these roles, because it was sort of like you had to choose at the time. Do you want to be a scientist or do you want to be a science communicator? Because they're not one and the same. Well, that's BS. I'm just going to call it out right now. That's not true. They're one and the same. Once an entomologist, always an entomologist. No one can take that away from me. And so I think, I had to get myself out of that mindset. So some of it is following your passions and what you know who you are, right? And what inspires you and where you're going to have that greatest impact. So go do it. Don't let anyone stop you from doing it. And then find others like those of us that are on the call that can help. If you're struggling or don't know where to start, feel free to reach out. I'm going to offer up my panelists. Hopefully you all are okay with that, to reach out to us and, see how we can help you get started. Because sometimes it does feel like you're a lone fish in a giant ocean, but there are so many others doing this now, and it just keeps growing. And that's what we need as science to change public perception. We have to be available. If we're not available, then the narrative is going to be made for us. We're not going to be making our own narrative. And I think we're much better off and much better served to personalize our science. So going back again to James and the stories, right? We all have our own story to tell. We're all very individual human beings. And if we can connect on that level, our science goes a lot further than if we just spew facts and we say, no, you're wrong, right? Let's listen. That's step one, and something that I had to learn the hard way. I like to talk a lot. And so I had to learn to stop and actually ask questions. Ask your audience why they're there. Ask your audience what they want from you. Then you can make a bigger impact because you're actually meeting their needs.
Absolutely. And I can't agree more with James and Rhonda on this, especially in terms of making the mistake. So I did for the first time. But one thing that I'd really like to add on here is the training that you received during, I think right from the start, at least in my case, it started from the masters, like where we are supposed to give seminars and we had to get the credits for that. So it was a credited course and we have had no other option but to, overcome our difficulties, our barriers. And I suggest to all the students who are planning to embark on a career, and public speaking is important. And what you are doing right now, whether you're in master's, whether you're in PhD, try to take this classes where you're supposed to give seminars very seriously. So that's a great way, great platform where you can enhance your public speaking skills. Rhonda mentioned about the Toastmasters Club. I also have experience in that. And it's a great place where you can further hone your skills. And of course, TED is another platform which I can think of where you just listen to amazing speakers, that too, the talks that are really timed. So in that way, you can get a lot of insights. Yeah.
I mean, very similar to what the previous speakers were saying. I showed it in my slide. It's a combination of practice makes perfect as you go along, and making mistakes all the way, and it's absolutely fine. But one element that I really enjoyed was the formal training that I received, during this accredited program, because it was really nice. We had different educators coming together and sharing ideas, sharing practices. So that communal element for me was really valuable. We created friendship, valuable connection, and we were all trying to kind of address similar problems, and hopefully we had a bigger impact as a community than just trying to solve it on our own.
Thank you for your responses and for all the wonderful recommendations to our audiences, books and YouTube channels and formal education. So we have a question now directed to Andrea, but the rest of you can also offer some insight onto this. How do you see current curricula in terms of actually empowering students through scientific literacy skills? What are some steps that academics can take to steer their lessons to develop these skills?
I mean, I think, and it was partially my last slide, that sort of socially critical curriculum. If you want to hook your audience, which is one of the kind of themes that we're discussing here, you really need to be talking about something that resonates with them, and then showing them how what they're learning can then be applied to, society, the day-to-day life. So a lot of the teaching I do is not about, picking a topic in genetics and kind of fleshing it out in all its beautiful and complex details, as we all know, but it's rather actually showing how that can be applied to situations specific, which could be, lots of us might have done some ancestry testing or genetic testing, but it might just be on a whim. They might not know particular implications or what it means. So it's kind of engaging with them with something that is current, something that is relevant for them to know, and something that they can then use themselves in their future, maybe talking to, could be family, could be to their future students or anybody. So kind of really making it current and relevant. And I think there's a lot to be said about changing the curriculum in that direction. Just the material itself is no longer sufficient to justify why they should be sitting in that audience.
There's a really interesting program being developed in the UK called Thinking, Talking, Doing Science. It's for sort of primary age children, so kids probably between about 8 and 12. But I think some of the themes in it can extend really to any age. And it's about getting kids to ask questions. So rather than just saying, here's a thing, look, learn this, they discover it themselves by asking their own questions, by experimenting and recording their results. They've done some really interesting research to develop this program, and they've found that kids have made huge progress in their science studies. And actually the kids who make the most progress are the ones that are most disadvantaged. Right? If you're a young girl and they're not into science, you do better under this scheme than if you're the able white boy who goes to science museums all the time, right? So it's a really interesting kind of scheme. And the challenge for getting these things into curricula at any level is the massive content that teaching staff have to get through. And I think we need to come to a point where we sacrifice some content and we think more about these key scientific literacy skills, because that's the point. It's so much easier to learn all that other stuff once you've developed those kind of key skills of knowledge and finding out the truth from myth.
That's really interesting. I hadn't heard of that scheme before here in the UK, so that's something to look into.
And of course, to add on to just one point to James, in India, and I'm sure this is also prevalent in many other parts of the world, you have this concept of incubation centers, all the big scientific institutes, institutes of excellence, they have something called incubation centers, which also hosts outreach activities. For example, in the Bangalore Life Sciences Cluster, for example, where I am in, so they have monthly outreach activities where we just reach out to people underprivileged sections. As I have mentioned in one of the slides, I mean, that is one of our key thrust areas. We are trying to make people, I mean, especially absolutely underprivileged students, but with great potential. So trying to make them enthusiastic about science. And from that pool, once in a month or once in maybe 2 months, just bring them here, just acquaint them with all the fancy things that scientists, do, wearing lab coats and, all the glasses and everything. So yeah, incubation centers in a way can, I feel, play a great role in terms of, enhancing science per se.
Amazing. So these outreach activities are very key. But when it comes to informal education and informal science outreach, how do we monitor and evaluate that?
Yeah, that's difficult. I was having a conversation with some students just this very morning about this thing. It's difficult. And often what we're hoping to achieve, our big aim, is often something that isn't measurable. It's a bit more intangible. But what we can do is think about what are the measurable shorter term impacts and outcomes that act as a proxy for that. So what are we leading towards, right? If I find that 80% of the people that I've spoken to today go and check out my website for further information, that's a good sign that they've learned something and they're progressing towards that longer picture that I'd like to get to. A nice way to kind of think about these things is to use a logic model tool. You can download templates from Tinternet. But in a logic model, you really start with one end. This is what I have. It's knowledge, it's stuff, it's money, it's time. These are the activities that I want to deliver. These are the things I'm going to produce. And these are the outcomes that I would expect and hope to see from that. And some of those early ones will be easy and tangible and measurable. And the longer distant things, which are less easy to get hold of and less easy to measure, well, we might be able to prove that we've done that, but we can show that we're working towards that thing. And we thought from the very start about our purpose. What are we actually trying to do, right? Are we doing this science communication thing just because it's a laugh? Or do we have some purpose? What are we heading towards? If you know what that is, much easier to monitor and evaluate, but it's never going to be a simple task.
Yeah, it's a question go ahead.
Yeah, please go ahead.
It's a struggle. It's something that comes up a lot. And how do you measure it, right? How do you measure your impact? And what is your impact, right? So we all have kind of an idea of what we want to accomplish when we do this kind of work, but it is difficult to measure, especially depending on the age groups that you're working with, right? So there's lots of privacy laws, for example, and protections around children and working with children and collecting data from children. So you have to be careful there and get the appropriate approvals so that you can publish that data if that's what you're looking to do. So we've struggled, honestly, to do that. We have kept track of the number of people we have engaged with. So I can say our Corteva program that we started when we were previously Dow AgriSciences and are now part of Corteva, that in the first 5 years of our program, we grew from one site locally in Indianapolis, Indiana, is kind of where it started, with a group of employees that were passionate getting it started. And in the first 5 years, we grew that program into a global program where, Corteva is a global operation. So we had employees around the world participating, and we hit 750,000 people in the first 5 years. So we were getting invited to a lot of events. We were doing a lot of things. That's one measurement, right? Has nothing to do with the impact on those people, but we know we at least had visibility in front of that many people. So that's one measure. It's not a super impactful measure. I wish I could say, oh, we had this great plan laid out. We don't. The other thing that I've been able to do is measure the impact on our volunteers. That is easier because now you're dealing with an adult audience, right? It's a group that I have captive, sort of, because they're employees, right? I know their emails. I know how to get a hold of them. I can keep badgering them to take that survey. So there's a lot of benefits to being able to do that. So I've been working toward hopefully a publication sometime in the future on that, of what have we learned from our own employees, of why do they do this? What is their motivation? What are they hoping to get? And so there's more information there that we can get to. Who are they? Are they new with the company? Are they longer tenured employees? So we have some of that data. And again, we did a survey to get to some of that. So that was easier for us. We're still hoping, we have a QR code with a survey developed for kind of in classroom or outside of classroom activities. But honestly, that how much data can we keep on youth is really something we're struggling to get around. So if anybody on this call is familiar with that, I would love to talk to you. So please contact me.
Yeah, I would just like to add one point here. I think the edtech companies, there are a lot of edtech companies. I can cite the example of India. In fact, one startup from the campus where I am in right now, it's called Plantae. We as scientists, we always tend to quantify things. And this particular company is exactly doing that. It's called Plantae. It was started by one of my friend, I think 3 or 4 years back. So what they are doing is they are trying to take the electrophysiological recordings of students. Suppose if someone is poor in maths and another student is poor in English, what they're getting is like real-time electrophysiological signatures from the brain per se. And then they're collaborating with an established edtech company called the Byju's. And accordingly, you have this quantifiable results. So it has just started, pacing itself up. And I hope, if this is pursued in the long run, it can really have a great impact in terms of spreading. And of course, another thing that I can think of is a concept that was started in the slums of New Delhi. It is called Hole in the Wall Project. And there is an amazing TED talk also that was given by an Indian scientist called Dr. Sugata Roy. And he walked into a slum and just kept a computer in one godforsaken area in a slum. And just 1 week back, they came and the team of scientists came and they saw that all the slum kids, they picked up computer on their own. And that was amazing in itself. But this became a rage 10 years back, 10 or 15 years back. It's called Hole in the Wall Project. If someone is interested, you can definitely get back to it. So yeah, there are pretty amazing things that's really happening. So yeah.
Thank you all. So we've got some digital ways of measuring as well as surveys and
Absolutely.
there's ideas being
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Lovely. So we'll move on to our next question. This one is one that several people have been asking. How can we get back into teaching after a career gap of several years? Andrea, you might have some insights on this.
Yeah, sure. It depends a little bit, obviously, what stage of teaching we're talking. That has some implication in terms of maybe the qualification you would need to. But I think in general, I myself, I was a bench scientist for a number of years. Then I took a bit of a break. So I worked in the third sector. In that case, it was sort of science education focused. So it was a kind of smooth transition to more teaching. But I think, it's just a general idea that any job you do, even if you take a career break, you will have developed some skills out of that. It might be a bit more difficult to formalize some of them. You maybe need to think for a little bit longer, but anything you do will gain you some skills. And then the question is how you can apply those skills to the new job. And, that is the key thing. We all have something to add to the table. And it's just kind of articulating that and then seeing the advantages. Lots of employers are now starting to see that way, and I think it's a very positive improvement compared to the past. But yeah, for me, it was nice. Like I gained other things during that year that I was outside of academia, and I was then able to bring that back.
And I think it's also what kind of teaching do you want to go into? Is it in the formal sort of university space, or is it in more of those informal, working at a museum, science center, or something along those lines? You all have transferable skills. It's a matter of saying, what are those transferable skills that I'm bringing, and how is my science background, even if it's a couple years old, contributing to the success of that new role or whatever that space is that you're wanting to go into. And then I think the other thing is, if you want to go into that teaching space and you don't maybe have that background and or experiences, how do you get yourself those? And so there's a lot of opportunities to volunteer for nonprofit organizations, be a science coach for some sort of event. And so those give you some of those things that you can talk to in an interview and put on your resume to strengthen it. So just because you don't have it as a role now doesn't mean that you can't do some things while you're, kind of preparing yourself for that next role.
Lovely, thank you. So we've got a question here directed at James. How can I overcome my fear of sounding weird when speaking to people and making a lasting bad impression?
Yeah, interesting question. The first thing is you don't sound weird. Right? You might think you sound weird. You don't sound weird. It's like we all hate the sound of our own voice, right? I made a radio program a few years ago, and I don't like listening to it because I can't like the sound of my own voice. But it was great, right? And loads of people did listen to it and thought it was really good. So the short answer is you don't sound weird. Just do it. And the second answer is you've just got to practice. You just need to do it. Right, you need to find opportunities to get out there and have a go, and that maybe that's just in your little group seminar, right? You're going to stand up and give a little report. Do it small scale, right, with people that you know. Maybe you're going to go to a conference and you're going to do a 5-minute flash talk there, right? Have a go, get up and sound about it. And I'd sort of pull back to the thing that I said in my little 5-minute thing at the beginning, is that people are really interested in you. Right? They're not interested in what you sound like or look like. They're interested in what you think and what you do and how you behave. So give them that, right? Tell them some stuff, and don't be too afraid of giving a bit of yourself. And I know it's hard for you to hear this, right? Because you've all been in academia, right? You've all spent the last 10 years learning to be third person and objective. No, throw all that away. Be first person, be I and we, yeah? And be emotive and tell me why you give a shit about stuff. And then I will, and I won't care what you sound like. Be brave. Go for it.
Thanks, James. That's really inspiring. Okay. Next question is directed at Andrea. Could you talk a little bit about what opportunities there are for people wanting to work in teaching focused roles at UK universities? The person says, I realize that most lectureships are awarded to researchers working at the group level. So what sort of qualifications and experience are required?
So it certainly used to be the case that you were kind of doing research and doing a little bit of teaching on the side. That was sort of the main model. And things are changing. I mean, I'm seeing that. So now there's a number of kind of teaching focused lectureship being advertised. Sometimes they use a slightly different term. So in a few universities, they call them university teachers. It's essentially the same job, just a different way of calling it. But I'm definitely seeing a shift to that. And I think is the recognition that people that are great at research, they might not be the best people to do the teaching, and vice versa. You know, it works both ways. You know, we all have things that we are very passionate about and maybe quite skilled at, and they don't necessarily overlap. So I think there's a bit of a recognition for that. In terms of qualifications, I was mentioning those accredited programs. So if you become the fellow of the Higher Education Academy, that tends to be the kind of an entrance criterion for some of the lectureship jobs. It doesn't matter that if you don't have that, you won't be considered. They just want you to show that you can achieve that maybe during your first year in the position or later on. There are different levels in terms of fellowship. You could be a member, associate member. So, you know, you can also start working towards that, even if you are just a PhD or postdoc. As you work through kind of your career, you can gain some of those skills through these programs. So I would recommend having a look at that, especially if the person that asked that question is based in the UK.
Thank you, Andrea, for that advice and for highlighting opportunities available. So we have time now for one final question, and all four of you can answer this if you'd like to. The person says, many of my students tend to be interested in science in general, but find them to be far less interested in plant sciences. How can I inspire them to take plant science research?
Well, I'll come back to the thing that I've repeated all afternoon. Show them why you're interested. Show them why you're excited. And also try to drill down to some of that weird stuff, right? Plants talk to each other. That there's loads of really counterintuitive hooks to get people excited and interested in plants. And we need to just get away from the pretty green things, right? And kind of get down to the nitty gritty. But the key thing is, why are you interested in it? Why do you care about it? and show them that, give a bit of that, and then maybe they'll catch your enthusiasm.
Absolutely. I would echo that, saying, you know, I mentioned conviction in one of my slides, and that's kind of the idea. You're passionate about your topic, and hopefully a little bit of that passion rubs off onto the next person. And, you know, using cool examples, and really, if you've got an opportunity to use an example and you're in that position, use a plant one maybe, and that is a little bit of a snowball effect, hopefully down the line.
And I would say ask questions. So what are your students interested in? What do they want to contribute to? Is it, you know, that they want to give back to their communities? Well, what a way to give back to a community by starting a community garden and saying, hey, we're going to address food insecurity and nutrition. So, and guess what? It's plants that do that, right? So what plants are tied to everything. I mean, sustainability, if they're super interested in sustainability, well, plants are a solution to that, right? I mean, there's so many of the global challenges that we have. Take the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, pick almost any one of them, and a plant can play a role in those. So I would start with asking questions to see, okay, what are my students or the person that I'm trying to engage the most, what are they passionate about? And then tell them how plants play a big role in that they could actually solve some of these challenges that they have in their local community through the exciting field of plants. And again, it goes back to you being excited about it. If you're not excited about it, they're not going to be excited about it, right? But if you can connect it to what really matters to them, then, you know, okay, this is a silly example, but when I was in teaching high school, I had to teach soils. So you think plants are hard, try soils, right? Yeah, okay. It's dirt, right, to a lot of people. So I don't know where I found it. It wasn't Rhonda's idea, but somebody had given me the idea of, you know, you look at soils. And so let's take some observations of what do we see? What do we feel? What's the texture? All of that. And we pass little baggies around. Well, I took some out and I threw it in my mouth. And so I had this soil going around. I made a big deal out of like how it was getting stuck in my teeth and how gritty it felt and all this. And it was really just a hook. If you take Oreo cookies and you grind them up, they look like potting soil. So you can even use gimmicks sometimes. I don't recommend gimmicks like every time, but in that case, it worked. It hooked them because they were thinking my teacher is eating dirt. What the heck? And so I had them immediately, right? So sometimes a gimmick works, but I will say I would default to asking questions, finding out what are they passionate about and connecting plants to their passion and saying, here's how plants make an impact on that.
And to add on to that, finally, I think it's also got to do with, I mean, oftentimes plants are used just as a model system, but the essential biology, the broad biological question that you are trying to address, that remains the same. I mean, for example, I'm sure many of the students know that the RNA, the phenomena, the first time it was reported by Dr. David Balcombe using a plant system. So, and today RNA has become a rage across all the model systems. So in terms of like many people, they often think that, okay, in terms of finding a job, like where exactly are we going to land if we have a degree in plant sciences? So I just want to tell them that it's not about what model systems you are using. It's about the technique that you are also using, that you are also appointing, that will actually fetch you the job out there. It has got plants are just a model. And of course, even if we speak in terms of a model, I think it's pretty much an amazing model. There's no blood, there's no fuss, there's nothing about it. It's an amazing thing to work with. And of course, coupled with, I mean, already as Rhonda mentioned, I mean, there's food problem, there's sustainability, there's climate change, there's so many pressing problems that's out there, I mean, which you can address only and only through plant systems. So, yeah.
Yep. Plants are the future.
Yeah.
This brings us to the end of the webinar. It's been a great experience, and thank you to our 4 wonderful speakers. Thank you to the moderators. Thank you to Jason and the rest of the Plantae team. Thank you to ASPB. And of course, the great audience we've had today. You guys have been amazing. You've kept the questions flowing. And have a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks all.
everyone.
Thank you.